Hello and welcome to the Black Hat Bushcraft channel. Today I wanted to have a quick discussion and do a few demonstrations on 3 simple techniques that I have found that help me achieve greater success starting fires with the ferrocerium rod. A lot of people refer to the ferrocerium rod as a ferro rod in short, and that tool has become the go-to resource for a lot of woodsmen when they go to start their fires. And just like any skill that a bushcrafter or woodsman might use, it's all about having the right technique. So I want to talk about those things today and what I've found that worked for me. Stick with me and we'll get started. When you go to buy a ferrocerium rod nowadays, there's so many different options of different types of tools that you might buy. I like less moving parts and I like simplicity. So there's 2 basic types of ferro rods that I use. The first one is the old standard, just a pocket ferrocerium rod, or a lot of my knife sheaths have a ferro rod loop on them, and a lot of times I'll put one of these style ferro rods in that loop, and it just rides on my knife and is there if I ever need it as a backup. My main ferro rod is always going to be a larger tool like this one, and this would be a 6-inch by 1/2 inch ferro rod. And I've just wrapped the end with the Gorilla Tape, and a lot of people will be familiar with that. It's taught at the Pathfinder School because this gives you a good handle that's not going to pop off, and it also serves as a fire lighting tinder or resource to help you start a fire. There's a lot of different techniques you can use with that. But nonetheless, a larger ferro rod is going to be better than a smaller. And the simple case is when you're striking a larger ferro rod, you're touching more surface area, which means you're going to throw more material or more sparks onto your tinder. So the larger ferro rods are going to help you become more successful at starting the fire. But that's where my video today comes in. If you can be just as successful with a small ferro rod, then you actually have better technique. If you can do it with this, with marginal tinder, then you know you can do it with this. So I like to practice with the smaller ferro rod because it's just a little more challenging, and that's what I'm going to use today to show you these techniques. But everything that I show you with this obviously can easily be transferred to the larger ferro rod, and it's going to just make you that much more successful when you use the better tool. Alright, the first technique I want to show you today is one that I utilize when I have a really good tinder source. For example, today I have a nice dry cotton ball. And a lot of people carry cotton balls soaked in Vaseline in their fire kit. It could also be a commercial surefire product. It could be a nice dry tinder bundle of tulip poplar bark or cedar bark or dry grass, things like that. Things that you don't anticipate being a problem to get ignited. If I'm using the less effective striker here, then this is the technique I utilize for it. If I were holding my knife, it would work the exact same way. So if I'm going to use the spine of a knife, this is the same technique regardless. But what I'll do is simply place my palm, the bottom of my palm here, right on the tip of my boot. And I'm going to brace that with my body weight. I'm going to kind of lean forward into that so my scraper stays stationary, doesn't move. And I simply pull up on the rod and direct the sparks directly to my tinder source. And you can see within one strike, I have ignition. So that's a really good way to control exactly where your sparks are going. You can easily throw that right where you want it to go with no problem. And you also get maximum material removal because your scraper is stationary. You can really pull up and bite into that ferro rod with good control, throwing your sparks again to the target that you want them to hit. Alright, this next technique is a little bit more finessing with the ferro rod. Basically, I hold it like this so there's only a small portion exposed at the very end. And with my scraper, I'm going to take my thumb off the handle and put it right against the tip of the metal. And now what I'll do is I'll push up with my index finger and down with my thumb on the scraper and bite really deep down into the ferro rod to pull off a nice thick piece of metal off the end of that. And while that doesn't make that shower of sparks that scraping the full length of the rod does, it does throw that one chunk off, which can go at a further distance. The advantage to that is when your tinder bundle is up inside of a fire lay and you can't get the ferro rod right up next to it to shower it sparks, sometimes you can accurately throw one little chunk off the end of this and be able to ignite that tinder bundle. Let me show you from the side how far you can literally throw metal off this ferro rod using this technique. Alright, let's say that your tinder bundle was up in a fire lay and it was impossible to get the ferro rod right up next to it to shower with sparks. This technique that I'm showing you works great when you need to throw a spark at a distance because you can throw it very accurately using this method. This is simply a tulip poplar little mini bird nest with some cattail fluff in it. But watch, my foot is an 11.5 boot, alright? So that's about a foot right here. If I step back from that, you can see at probably a foot, 12 inches or more, I was able to hit that with that spark and get that ignition. So you get the idea with that. So it works really good at a distance. Alright, this third technique works really best when you have marginal tinder. For example, these are just some pieces I carved off of a feather stick. And while that's nice dry material, it's not nearly as easy to achieve combustion with something coarse like that as it is with like a processed tulip poplar or processed cedar bark. Or something like scrapings off of a piece of fat wood that has an accelerant in it to help take that spark. This could also represent material that's wet, like say tulip poplar or cedar bark, and maybe it's a little bit damp, and you need to get that stuff heated up and dried out a little bit using your ferro rod to achieve that ignition. But anyway, this technique works good to throw the maximum amount of sparks rapidly onto that material to heat it up and achieve that combustion. Alright, here's how this works. You simply place your ferro rod right on your material, and I like to put it right in the middle of that material so that way I hit the maximum amount of my tinder. And you take your scraper and you rapidly hit that material, and you can see this is a little bit stubborn too. There we go. And that'd have been harder to achieve if I'd have just been throwing one thrust of the ferro rod at one time, but doing it like this, I was able to get that material heated up enough and throw enough metal, molten metal on it to get it to ignite. It's a great method. Alright, one bonus technique that's well worth mentioning with the ferro rod is that you can treat this tool much like you would a magnesium block, in that you can slowly scrape material off the ferro rod and accumulate those scrapings into a small pile. And then when you actually strike the ferro rod, all those shavings will ignite at once, giving you intense heat and a better opportunity to ignite your tinder. Especially if you're using like a damp tinder or more coarse material, this will give you a lot better chances at igniting that. So it's very simple to do. You just place your ferro rod down where you want to collect your shavings. In this case, I'm just using a coarsely processed tulip poplar bird nest. And you got to be very careful not to spark this while you're doing it. So scraping slowly is definitely the key. And I always try to rotate my ferro rod as I'm doing this so I don't scrape too much material off of one spot, creating a big flat space. Try to just scrape all the way around the diameter of that ferro rod, keeping it round. It also helps because you're scraping ridges rather than a big flat space, and that makes the job a little easier. Seems to go quicker. But all I'm doing here is just knocking off fine shavings that are collecting at the end of that ferro rod. You can take time, if you have a really stubborn tinder, you can take the time to collect up a lot of this material, and it gives you a really good blast of sparks when you do ignite the ferro rod. It's basically like striking your ferro rod 10 times at once. And this really works well, like if you have a piece of Gorilla Tape, you can actually scrape this down onto the Gorilla Tape to collect the shavings. Or if you make a Gorilla Tape bird nest and you scrape these shavings on top of it, it'll stick to all the sticky parts of in the bird nest and just give you that much better chance of ignition. And that's not a technique that I originated. So I'm not going to keep going with this. It shouldn't be too difficult, but right down here in the center, and I can't move that, there's just these small little scrapings. If I move it, I'm most likely going to lose that material. But then when I do strike my ferro rod, all that stuff kind of goes off at once, and it gives you that better chance of ignition for your material. You'll also notice it kind of sparking after the fact. See those sparks? That's all that material that I processed, and it's just giving you that much better chance to keep that material hot and get your ignition. It's definitely a worthwhile technique to practice and to know. Alright, I'd like to thank you guys for taking the time to tune in for these quick demonstrations of the 3 techniques that I found that work best for me when using a ferrocerium rod to start fire. There are a lot of other techniques that you might experiment with, and I've tried different things, but these are the ones that I always come back to. I did choose to use the smaller diameter ferro rod today because I feel like it presents a bigger challenge. Using the large ferro rod obviously is smart, when push comes to shove or when it really counts, because you're going to remove more metal with the larger diameter rod. Therefore, you're going to get your tinder hotter, faster, and achieve ignition that much easier. But for practice, we want to challenge ourselves. So using that smaller rod with a smaller scraper just makes you that much better. When you use the spine of your knife on a larger rod, you're going to rip that much more metal off. And again, you know, if you have that technique down, it's going to be that much more successful. So that's why I chose to use the smaller one. I also have to think that at some point, maybe I lose that larger diameter ferro rod, and the only one I have left is in my pocket, that little emergency one, or the one that's on the sheath, my knife sheath. Then I may have to depend on that, and I want to know that I can use that with just as much success as I do with the 6" by 1/2" ferro rod. So that was my reasoning behind that. Alright, no ferro rod video would be quite complete without throwing sparks off a large ferro rod, at least once, just for fun. You can see a big difference in the sparks that come off the larger rod using the spine of your knife. It just throws a massive amount of sparks. It's definitely a difference. When push comes to shove, that's what you want. It's good to have the other just in case. I appreciate you guys taking the time to tune in. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you'll like it. Give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to the Black Hat Bushcraft channel, I hope that you will do that. Hope you'll come back often, as I look forward to talking to you with another video as soon as possible. And until then, take care, and God bless.